There's something about the quiet of the night that makes any disturbance feel sharper, louder, and somehow more sinister. That's exactly how I felt as the violent banging on my door shattered the stillness of my almost sleep. It wasn't a casual knock. It was urgent, erratic, almost desperate. For a moment, I froze in bed, my pulse hammering in my ears. Who could possibly be at my door at this hour? I glanced at the clock on my bedside table. 2:13 a.m. Too late for a casual visit. Too early for a normal start to anyone's day. My mind raced through possibilities. A neighbor in trouble? A drunk mistaking my door for theirs? Or something worse? I cursed under my breath as I slid out from beneath my warm blanket, the chill of the floorboards biting into my feet as I crept toward the front door. The pounding didn't stop. Whoever it was, they were relentless. Just a second, I called out, trying to sound more annoyed than afraid. But my voice trembled slightly, betraying my nerves. I reached the door, hesitating for the briefest of moments before looking through the peephole. My heart jumped into my throat. It was my neighbor, Mr. Henderson, a middle-aged man who always kept to himself, the kind of guy who gave polite nods in passing but never more than that. But this wasn't the Mr. Henderson I recognized. His face was pale, almost ghostly in the dim light of my porch. His hair, usually neat, was disheveled, sticking out in wild tufts. His eyes darted around like he was expecting something or someone to jump out of the shadows. "Open the door! Please!" he shouted, his voice cracking. Everything in me screamed to lock the door and pretend I wasn't home. But something about his expression stopped me. It wasn't just fear, it was sheer terror. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the deadbolt and cracked the door open. Before I could say a word, he shoved his way inside. The door hadn't even opened fully before Mr. Henderson pushed past me, slamming it shut behind him with a force that made the walls shudder. His erratic breathing filled the small hallway, a mix of gasps and muttered words that made no sense. I stood there, stunned, unsure of how to react. "Hey, what's going on?" I finally managed to ask, my voice sharper than I intended. But he didn't respond. He leaned against the door, as if trying to brace himself against an unseen force. I didn't know where else to go," he stammered, his words tumbling out like a stream he couldn't control. "They're out there. They're watching. I'm telling you, they're watching." "What? Who's watching?" I pressed, feeling my unease grow with each passing second. He turned to face me then, and for the first time, I saw the full extent of his distress. Sweat dripped from his brow despite the chill of the night, and his hands trembled violently. His eyes, wide and bloodshot, locked onto mine. "You have to help me," he whispered, his voice hoarse and desperate. My instincts told me to keep my distance, but I couldn't ignore the raw panic in his voice. "All right, calm down. Just tell me what's happening." I gestured toward the couch in the living room. "Why don't you sit down and we'll figure this out?" But he didn't move toward the couch. Instead, he clutched something tightly to his chest, something wrapped in a dirty, blood-stained cloth. I hadn't noticed it before, but now it was impossible to ignore. "What is that?" I asked, my voice quieter now, edging toward alarm. He flinched, his grip tightening on the bundle. "I can't let them get it. If they get it, I'm done. They'll pin it all on me." The vague explanation only made things worse. My heart was racing, my mind flipping through scenarios, none of them good. Was he talking about the police? Some kind of criminal organization? Was I in danger just by letting him in? "Okay, you need to explain what's going on," I said, taking a step back toward the kitchen, where my phone sat charging on the counter. If things got out of hand, I'd need to call for help, and fast. Henderson began pacing, clutching the bundle like it was the only thing tethering him to reality. "You don't get it," he hissed. "They're gonna find me. They'll find me here if I stay too long. But I couldn't go anywhere else. They're watching my house, watching my car, everywhere. The way he spoke, with a mix of paranoia and despair, sent a chill down my spine. I wasn't sure if he was genuinely being followed or if his mind had spiraled into some dark place. Either way, it was clear that whatever he was holding was at the center of it all. "I just need a few minutes," he said, stopping abruptly. "Please, let me stay for just a few minutes." I nodded, but my instincts were on high alert. There was something deeply unsettling about him. Something that made me feel I wasn't just dealing with a scared man. I was dealing with someone who could be dangerous. I couldn't take my eyes off the bundle in his hands. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a shoebox, but the way he clung to it, like his life depended on it, sent my thoughts spiraling into dark possibilities. The cloth was damp in places, the faintest hint of red seeping through. Blood. My stomach twisted, and I fought the urge to take another step back. "Henderson," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "You need to tell me what's in that." His head snapped toward me, eyes wild. "It's better if you don't know," he said, his voice low and trembling. "Trust me. If they find out you've seen it, they'll come after you too." Every word he spoke only deepened the pit forming in my stomach. My rational side screamed at me to throw him out, lock the door, and call the police. But a small part of me, the part that recognized the fear in his eyes as genuine, held me in place. I gestured toward the kitchen table. "Put it down," I said, trying to sound calm, authoritative even. "Whatever's in there, let's figure this out together." He hesitated, his grip tightening as though I just asked him to hand over his own child. But after a long moment, he moved to the table and set the bundle down with an almost reverent care. The cloth sagged slightly, its weight shifting in a way that made me think whatever was inside was heavy, solid. For a moment, we just stood there, staring at it. The silence was oppressive, broken only by Henderson's uneven breathing. "Open it," I said finally. He shook his head violently. No, you don't want to see this. I shouldn't have brought it here. Then why did you?" I shot back, my patience fraying. "You show up in the middle of the night, saying someone's after you, holding that, and expect me not to ask questions?" Henderson ran a trembling hand through his hair, his fingers leaving trails of sweat in their wake. "I didn't know where else to go," he muttered. "I thought—" He stopped himself, his gaze darting toward the front door. "You're the only one who might believe me." I didn't know what to say to that, so I reached out, hesitating just before my fingers touched the cloth. Henderson flinched but didn't stop me. Slowly, carefully, I pulled back the edges of the fabric. The sight that greeted me made my breath catch in my throat. A knife, a large, jagged hunting knife, its blade glinting faintly in the dim light of my kitchen. Blood coated the metal, dark and sticky, with flecks dried near the handle. It was the kind of thing you'd see in a crime scene photo, not in the middle of your own home. "What the hell, Henderson?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding in my ears. He didn't respond right away, his gaze fixed on the knife like it was some cursed object. Finally, he spoke, his voice hollow. "I didn't have a choice. They made me take it. They—" I repeated, struggling to keep up. "Who's they? What is this?" He shook his head again, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of the table. "You don't understand. They'll kill me if they think I still have it." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud, and for the first time, I felt the weight of something much larger than either of us pressing down on the room. Henderson looked like a man unraveling before my eyes. His breathing was shallow, his gaze flitting around the room as though the walls themselves could betray him. I wanted answers, but every time I tried to pin him down with a question, his responses only seemed to spiral further into chaos. "They've been following me," he said, pacing back and forth in my kitchen. "Everywhere. First at work, then at home. I saw them outside my window last night. I swear it. Shadows moving where there shouldn't have been any." "Okay," I said cautiously, trying to make sense of his frantic words. "Who are they? Are we talking about the police?" Someone you know. He stopped mid-step, staring at me as if I'd just asked the dumbest question in the world. No, not the police, he hissed, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. They're not normal. They're connected. They know everything. They see everything. The paranoia in his tone made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Henderson, you're not making sense. Look, if someone's threatening you, we can call the police right now. No, he barked, slamming his hand down on the table. The knife clattered slightly in its makeshift wrapping, and I took an involuntary step back. His outburst seemed to surprise even himself. He raised his hands as if to apologize. I'm sorry, he stammered, but you don't understand. The police won't help. They're in on it, or they're too scared to act. Either way, I can't trust them. His words were jagged, fragmented, and soaked in fear. I didn't know whether to believe him or to assume he was losing his grip on reality. A part of me wanted to push him out the door and wash my hands of the whole situation. But another part, the one staring at the bloodied knife on my table, knew it wasn't that simple. Start from the beginning, I said, trying to ground him. Tell me what happened tonight. Why are you here? He let out a shaky breath and ran a hand through his sweat-matted hair. It started 3 days ago, he began, his voice quieter now. I found it, this knife, in my car. No note, no explanation. Just there. At first, I thought it was some sick prank, but then strange things started happening. Cars following me, my house being watched. And then today he trailed off, his eyes darting to the window as though he expected to see someone staring back at him. What happened today? I pressed, trying to keep him focused. They came to my door, he whispered. 2 men in suits. They didn't knock. They just stood there, waiting, watching. I left through the back and drove around for hours before I came here. I couldn't go home. They're probably still there, waiting for me to slip up. It sounded insane, like something out of a conspiracy thriller. And yet, the sheer conviction in his voice made me pause. And the knife? I asked, glancing at the weapon again. Why bring it here? Henderson's hands shook as he gripped the edge of the table. Because they'll kill me if I have it. They're trying to pin something on me. Something I didn't do. I don't know who else to trust. I was torn between wanting to believe him and the sinking suspicion that I was being dragged into something I wanted no part of. But one thing was clear. I couldn't let this go on much longer without outside help. The bundle sat between us like a living thing, heavy with an unspoken weight that neither of us wanted to fully acknowledge. I couldn't keep my eyes off it. The blood-stained cloth that hinted at something darker than just Henderson's paranoia. Against my better judgment, I decided I needed to see it again, to make sure my mind wasn't playing tricks on me. Henderson, I said carefully, if you want me to help you, I need to understand what's really going on. That means we have to deal with whatever this is. I gestured to the knife. He flinched, hugging his arms to his chest as though I'd suggested something monstrous. No, you don't need to see it again. You've seen enough. I've seen just enough to know this is serious. I shot back. If you're in danger, I need to know why. And if this thing is connected to it, we can't just sit here staring at it. Henderson hesitated, his hands twitching as he weighed his options. Finally, with a resigned sigh, he nodded. Fine, he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. But don't say I didn't warn you. I stepped closer to the table, the air between us taut with tension. My fingers brushed the edge of the cloth, and I carefully peeled it back again. The knife lay there, its blade gleaming faintly under the dim kitchen light. The blood dried in streaks that painted a picture of violence. This time, I forced myself to look closer. The knife was large, clearly meant for hunting or something equally brutal. But there was something else. Carved into the blade were strange markings, almost like runes or symbols. They were uneven, crudely etched, and completely foreign to me. What are these? I asked, pointing to the markings. Henderson paled. his eyes darting to the symbols before quickly looking away, as though even acknowledging them was dangerous. "That's how I know it's them," he said, his voice trembling. "Those marks. I've seen them before, on their suits, their briefcases. It's their symbol." The absurdity of his claim made me want to dismiss it outright, but the fear in his eyes was so visceral that I couldn't ignore it. I reached for my phone, suddenly certain I needed help. "We can't keep this here," I said firmly. "I'm calling someone. The police, a lawyer, someone who knows what to do with this." "No." Henderson lunged forward, his hand slamming down over mine to stop me from picking up the phone. The sudden movement made me jump, and my pulse skyrocketed. "Let go," I snapped, yanking my hand free. "You don't understand," he pleaded. "If you call them, they'll take it, and then they'll come for you. They'll silence you just like they're trying to silence me. This knife, it's not just a weapon. It's evidence. It's the only thing keeping me alive right now." "Evidence of what?" I demanded, my frustration boiling over. Henderson looked at me with an expression that chilled me to the core. "Murder," he said simply. The word hit me like a physical blow. My knees felt weak, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "What do you mean, murder?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "There was a man," Henderson began, his voice distant. "I didn't know him, I swear. But they'll say I killed him. They'll make it look like I did. That's how they work. They use things like this." He gestured to the knife. "They plan it, they frame you, and then they make you disappear." His words felt like madness, but the blade sitting in front of me, soaked in blood, made it impossible to dismiss him entirely. For the first time, the reality of the situation truly sank in. I was caught in something far bigger than myself, and whatever I did next could change everything. Henderson's words hung heavy in the air, but they didn't sit right. There was something off, a gap between his story and the sheer panic in his eyes. "You're saying they planted this knife in your car to frame you for murder?" I asked, trying to make sense of it all. "And now they're following you?" "Yes," he said quickly, his voice shaky. "That's what they do. They create evidence, manipulate everything. They know how to make people disappear. But why you? Why would they go to all this trouble?" His eyes darted to the side, avoiding mine. I don't know. Maybe I saw something I wasn't supposed to. Maybe I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I folded my arms, unconvinced. "That's not enough of a reason to go after you like this. What aren't you telling me?" "I've told you everything," he snapped, slamming his hand on the table. "Why won't you just believe me?" "Because your story doesn't add up." I shot back. "If you want my help, I need the truth. All of it." He opened his mouth as if to argue, then stopped. For a moment, he just stared at the knife, his shoulders slumping under the weight of something he couldn't bring himself to say. "I didn't have a choice," he muttered finally, his voice barely audible. "There was a fight, and things got out of control." My stomach dropped. "Henderson, what did you do?" He looked at me, tears welling in his eyes. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I swear." My pulse quickened as the pieces started falling into place. Whatever Henderson had gotten himself into, it wasn't just paranoia. This was real, and far worse than I had imagined. I stared at Henderson, my mind racing. This wasn't just a strange story anymore. It was a potential crime, and I was in way over my head. I needed help. Someone who could handle this without the emotional weight crushing me. "Henderson," I said carefully, "you can't stay here. This is too big for me to deal with alone. We need to get someone involved, someone who knows what to do." "No!" he barked, his panic flaring again. "You don't understand. If they find out I'm here, they'll kill me. If the police take this knife, I'm done. They'll twist it, use it against me. I can't trust anyone." The room felt suffocating, his paranoia pressing down on me like a physical force. But I couldn't just stand by and let him spiral deeper into this madness, or let this knife, bloodied and etched with cryptic markings. Stay in my home. I can't do this alone, I said, trying to steady my voice. If you're innocent, you need to prove it. Hiding isn't going to help. I'm not hiding, he insisted, his voice breaking. I'm trying to survive. I took a slow step back, forcing my hands to stay at my sides so he wouldn't see how badly they were shaking. Let me get us some water, I said calmly. We need to think this through. He didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the knife like it held all the answers he couldn't bring himself to say. Taking the opportunity, I turned and headed for the kitchen, my heart pounding. My phone was still on the counter where I'd left it earlier, and with trembling fingers, I unlocked it. I couldn't let him stop me this time. I needed to call the police. Quietly, quickly, before things got worse, I picked up my phone with shaky hands, glancing over my shoulder to make sure Henderson hadn't followed me into the kitchen. He was still in the dining room, pacing back and forth, muttering to himself in a frantic loop. His paranoia seemed to pull him deeper into whatever dark spiral he was trapped in. Taking a deep breath, I opened the dialer and pressed 911. The line connected almost immediately. This is emergency services. What's your emergency? I kept my voice low, barely above a whisper. Hi, I need assistance at my address. My neighbor, he's in my house and he brought something dangerous. I think he might be involved in a crime. The dispatcher's tone sharpened. Are you in immediate danger? No, but he's agitated. I don't think he's stable, and I'm afraid of what might happen if I don't get help. Okay, she said calmly. Stay on the line. Officers are on their way. Are you in a safe location? I'm in the kitchen, I replied, casting another glance at Henderson. He hadn't moved, his attention still glued to the knife. I'll stay here until they arrive. Good. Keep your phone on, but don't confront him. We'll handle it. I ended the call, feeling a mix of relief and dread. Help was coming, but it would take time. Every second felt like an eternity as I returned to the dining room, forcing my expression into something neutral. Water, I said, placing a glass in front of him. Henderson looked up briefly, his face lined with exhaustion and fear. You think I'm crazy, don't you? He muttered, his voice hollow. I think you're scared, I replied, taking the chair across from him. But if you're telling the truth, you need more help than I can give you. Someone needs to sort this out before it gets worse. He stared at me for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether I was on his side or not. They'll come for me, he whispered. Even if I give this to the police, they'll find me. They always do. I said nothing, my heart pounding as I waited for the sound of sirens to break the tense silence. The faint sound of sirens broke the stillness, cutting through the tension like a knife. Henderson's head snapped up, his eyes widening in terror. No, 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 he muttered, backing away from the table. You called them. You called them. I raised my hands in what I hoped was a calming gesture. Henderson, listen to me. This is for your own good. They'll help you figure this out. You don't have to run anymore. You don't get it, he shouted, his voice cracking. He grabbed the knife, still wrapped in the blood-stained cloth, and clutched it to his chest. They'll twist everything. They'll make me the villain. There was no reasoning with him now. His fear had completely overtaken him, and I could feel the panic radiating off him like heat. My own heart was racing as I heard the unmistakable sound of tires screeching to a halt outside. A loud knock echoed through the house. Police! Open the door! They're here! Henderson hissed, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal. I stood up slowly, making my way to the door. Just stay calm, I said, more for myself than for him. Let me talk to them. The moment I unlocked the door, 2 officers pushed inside, their hands resting on their holsters. Where is he? One of them asked, scanning the room. I pointed toward the dining area. He's in there. Be careful. He's holding a knife. The officers moved cautiously into the room, their presence authoritative but not aggressive. Sir, One of them said, his voice firm but calm. "Put the knife down. We're here to help." Henderson backed against the wall, clutching the bundle tighter. "You're not here to help," he spat. "You're here to bury me." "Put the knife down," the officer repeated, taking a step closer. "We can't help you if you don't cooperate." For a moment, it felt like time froze. Henderson's wild eyes flicked between the officers, the knife, and me. Then, with a shuddering breath, he slowly set the bundle on the table and raised his hands. The officers moved quickly, restraining him before he could change his mind. As they guided him toward the door, his eyes locked onto mine. "You shouldn't have called them," he said, his voice trembling. "You've made yourself a target, too. They'll come for you now." I didn't know what to say, the weight of his words pressing down on me. Was it paranoia? Or was there truth in his warning? As the officers led him out and secured the knife, the house fell silent once again. But the feeling of dread lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. The house was eerily quiet after they took Henderson away, but the chaos he left behind still lingered in the air. The officers stayed for a while, taking my statement and bagging the knife as evidence. Every detail felt surreal, as though I were recounting a nightmare I hadn't yet woken up from. As they prepared to leave, one officer lingered. He was older, with a face that seemed to carry the weight of too many nights like this one. "We'll need you to come down to the station tomorrow for a formal statement," he said, his tone professional but kind. "Of course," I replied, though my voice sounded distant even to my own ears. After they left, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the empty table where the knife had been. Henderson's parting words replayed in my head. "They'll come for you now." The next day, I followed up at the station as promised. The detective on the case, a sharp-eyed woman named Reed, walked me through the basics of what they'd uncovered. Henderson's story had some truth to it, she said, flipping through her notes. The knife was connected to a crime scene, a homicide. A man was found dead 3 nights ago in an abandoned warehouse downtown. My stomach turned. "And Henderson, did he do it?" Reed tilted her head. "That's the part we're trying to figure out. Henderson claims he was set up, but the victim was someone he knew, a business associate he had a dispute with recently. His fingerprints are on the knife, but the scene suggests there might have been a struggle, so he could be innocent." I asked, clinging to the possibility. Reed hesitated, then leaned forward. "Look, we're keeping all options open, but the symbols on that knife, they're not random. We've seen markings like that before, tied to let's just say, a group with a reputation for coercion and intimidation. If Henderson's telling the truth, he may have been a pawn in something bigger." Her words sent a chill down my spine. "What kind of group?" Reed shook her head. "That's classified for now. But let me give you some advice. If you see or hear anything unusual, call us immediately." I left the station with more questions than answers, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. Henderson might not have been as paranoid as he seemed. Whatever he'd stumbled into wasn't just about him anymore. That night, as I locked every door and window in my house, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. A shadow flickered outside, but when I peered through the blinds, there was no one there. I told myself it was my imagination, but deep down I knew Henderson's warning wasn't empty. This wasn't over.